So, the coastal giant salamander, or Dicamptodon tenebrosus, is a vertebrate of the phylum Chordata and pertains to the class Amphibia. It fits into the phylum Chordata because of the presence of pharyngeal slits in the endostyle early in its life cycle, two organs which are related to the process of filter feeding. They also have a notochord, a rod-like structure of cartilage-like cells which has many purposes, but mostly aids in development. In its subphylum being Vertebrata, it has a segmented chain of vertebrates and a brain enclosed in their skull. Some of the characteristics of this class, Amphibia, are breathable skin, waterproof eggs, and that they're ectotherms, meaning that they rely on environmental heat sources. They also undergo metamorphosis, wherein their gills transform into a respiratory system with lungs. There's the exception of neotenic organisms, which I will talk about later. Then there are the characteristics of D. tenebrosus, a large, mostly terrestrial salamander with marbled black and brown skin. However, there are only 4 other species of the family Dicamptodontidae and genus Dicamptodon, and they often hybridize due to overlapping ranges, so the patterns can vary quite a bit. Here are a couple images of them. You can see that this one's rather small, but they're still pretty hefty little guys, reaching a maximum of 34 centimeters, a little more than a ruler length. These images show their horizontally compressed tails and costal grooves, which are those things along their rib area. So, neoteny is something that's often seen in members of the suborder Salamandroida, and it's due to paedomorphosis, where an organism never develops past its final aquatic larval stage. Paedomorphosis simply means delayed physiological development, and there are 2 aspects of it. So, one is the acceleration of sexual maturation relative to the rest of its development, which is known as progenesis, and the retardation of bodily development with respect to the onset of reproductive activity, which is known as neoteny. In salamanders, this means that they don't lose the gills, thus never developing lungs and staying in the water. This is particularly common amongst the British Columbian populations of the coastal giant salamander, and most likely comes as a result of a hostile environment wherein it is simply too much more riskier to leave that water. You may be familiar with the axolotl, which is a perpetually neotenic species of salamanders. And here are a few photos of the axolotl. You can see their gills. They're the little purple frilly things on the side of their face. So, yeah. And the habitat of the coastal giant salamander ranges from northern California to southern BC, where they reside in temperate rainforests of the west coast. They mostly live in lotic areas, that is to say rapidly moving water, and in those areas they're known to be found by rotting logs and under rocks. Although they don't occupy an exceptionally remarkable niche, the role that they play is nonetheless an important one. They are both predators and prey, providing food for creatures higher up in the food chain and keeping the population of their prey, different species of bugs and slugs, at bay. Although their skin doesn't secrete irritating substances like many other species of salamanders do, for example the rough-skinned newt, they still do produce a slippery mucus that makes it difficult for predators to grasp them. Now on to body systems, starting with protecting the individual. The integumentary system of the coastal giant salamander is similar to virtually all other amphibians. They are coated in a thin layer of cutaneous, meaning breathable, skin, which secretes mucus in order to keep the salamander nice and slippery. They shed their skin in order to allow new cells to grow. Salamanders will then consume the skin that they shed because it is a high source of protein and helps them grow. The immune system of salamanders is particularly interesting because they have the ability to regenerate lost limbs. They can regrow limbs as well as other body parts such as the jaw and parts of their eye. This process takes place in 2 major steps. First, the cells around the site of the wound regress from their specialized function into a simpler and more generalized form, known as progenitor cells. These cells then proliferate. This mass of dedifferentiated progenitor cells is called a blastema. As the blastema forms, pattern formation genes, such as the Hox genes, are activated. The activation of the Hox genes, such as Hox A and Hox D, tell the blastemal cells to grow just as if the salamander were developing a limb and embryo. The next step is differentiation, where the less specialized cell becomes a more specialized cell type. The blastemal cells then differentiate into the cells needed in order to grow a limb, and the body part is recovered. Macrophages, a type of white blood cell that consumes debris, have proved integral to this process, and without them, salamanders would be unable to do this. And as you can see here, the process takes about 3 months to fully regrow a limb. This series of photos were taken by researchers at Australian Regenerative Medicine Institute at Monash University. So next in maintaining the individual is general digestion and absorption. Aside from their short, straight gut, the organs involved in the digestive system of the coastal giant salamander are similar to those of humans. Both are complete, but it's the details that differ. They use inertial feeding as they lack the muscles needed in order to swallow things, and their prey can be large in comparison to their mouth. Inertial feeding is when an organism thrusts their head back in order to force the prey down their throat. Once the prey is down their throat, they have cilia, a microscopic hair-like structure, which helps them guide the prey down their throats. When the prey reaches their stomach, they have enzymes which help dissolve it. If the prey is an arthropod with a chitinous shell, they have a special enzyme called chitinase, which dissolves the shell. The respiratory system of the coastal giant salamanders depends on whether or not they're neotenic, therefore aquatic, or if they're terrestrial. If they're aquatic, they have a simple set of gills. However, if they're terrestrial, they'll have a set of lungs. Both have a closed circulatory system where the blood is pumped by a heart through the vessels and does not fill body cavities. All salamanders have few septa and alveoli, therefore a slow diffusion rate. They also use buccal pumping as they don't have the muscles needed in order to inflate their lungs. Here's a little diagram of what buccal pumping looks like. And they do this by inflating the buccal cavity, closing the nostrils, opening the glottis, and then inflating the lungs. After the inhalation process is finished, they begin exhaling by deflating the lungs, therefore inflating the buccal cavity and letting the air out via the nostrils. You may have seen frogs doing this. They just pump their little throat up and back and down. But salamanders do it too. Next is the circulatory system, which also varies from aquatic and terrestrial coastal giant salamanders. In juvenile or aquatic salamanders, the system is similar to that of a fish, with a single loop of blood vessels being oxygenated by the gills and pumped by the heart. Their heart only has two chambers, a ventricle and an atria. However, in terrestrial salamanders, the system is slightly more complex. They have a three-chambered heart with one ventricle and two atria. The deoxygenated blood goes to the pulmonary artery, then to the lungs, and is then distributed throughout the body. And this is just a little diagram of the circulatory of juvenile salamanders. You can see where the blood becomes deoxygenated and starts looping around to the heart. The excretory system of salamanders is very similar to that of humans. They have most of the same organs, save for two differences. Like humans, terrestrial salamanders' kidneys take the excess nitrogen in the body and turn it into urea. However, in aquatic versions of the species, this waste product is turned into ammonia. This is because ammonia is extremely toxic and can be diffused quicker in aquatic salamanders than their terrestrial counterparts. They also have a cloacal vent rather than an anus or urethra, which functions as both orifices. Then we move on to locomotion and movement, the systems which help the salamanders move around. Like many of the other bodily systems, the muscular system of D. tenebrosus also varies depending on the lifestyle. Aquatic variants have dorsal and ventral fins in order to glide smoothly through the water. The terrestrial variants walk on one foot ahead of the other, as many of the other tetrapods do, like their ancestor, the lobe-finned fish. Both terrestrial and aquatic specimens have webbed feet in order to help propel themselves in water. They're bilaterally symmetrical and have highly developed branchiomeric and hyobranchial muscles, both facial muscles related to the jaw, which help them reach and grasp their prey. The skeletal system is homologous or similar to most other tetrapods, save for their hollow bones. Their ilium, a bone attached to the pelvis, slopes forward, which is why they're so close to the ground. The pectoral girdle is quite strong in order to support the weight of their head. Next are the systems of coordination, starting with the nervous system. The brain of D. tenebrosus is small, composed of a cerebrum, midbrain, and cerebellum. However, their cerebellum is quite large in comparison to the rest of the brain. The cerebellum aids with the initiation and coordination of voluntary activity in the body. They have a very good sense of smell, with the vomeronasal organ in their brain and their olfactory system being highly developed. The eye of the salamander has shown to sense color and depth. There's then the endocrine system, the slow coordination. Salamanders have a few notable hormones, most of them related to metamorphosis and a transition from aquatic to terrestrial. The pituitary and thyroid glands control when to release the hormones that order the development of lungs, rear legs, etc. An excess of the hormone thyroxine will result in a terrestrial adult salamander, where an excess of the hormone prolactin results in an aquatic neotenic salamander. The pineal gland also controls hormones and tells the body when to shed their skin or go into hibernation. And the final bodily system, reproduction, which is crucial to maintaining the species. Because both male and female coastal giant salamanders are similar in color and size, they have quite sophisticated olfactory senses and pheromone systems. Although courtship of this species of salamander has never been directly observed, it is assumed that they follow a similar ritual as the other salamanders, which involves the release of pheromones and the tail straddling walk, where the female straddles the male's tail and places her chin on the male's back. And in this position, they walk forward in tandem. After courtship, the salamanders migrate to a river where the male will deposit his spermatophore into the water. They form a gelatinous mass where they are then picked up by the female's cloacal vent. These spermatophores are then moved into the spermatheca, a specialized organ where sperm can be stored and fertilized whenever. Once the eggs have undergone meiosis, they are oviposited into concealed, slow-moving water where the female will guard them until they hatch. And here's the life cycle of the salamander, starting with the eggs, then developing eggs, which hatch after 6 to 7 months, then 3 different stages of larva, and finally the terrestrial adult, although that's not necessarily the endgame for all coastal giants. As previously mentioned, some of them end up neotenic, and this last stage is not necessary. After the second larval stage, salamanders will take 5 to 7 years to reach sexual maturity, and they live for an average of 20 years. Salamanders play 2 important roles in our ecosystem, both as predators and prey. They're a source of food for countless species of birds, reptiles, and mammals, and they also eat anything smaller than them. This means things like slugs, worms, beetles, etc. This keeps the population of potentially harmful bugs under control, but it does something else as well. When leaves fall to the forest floor, larvae and other bugs will swarm to them, eating them up and releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. By eating these bugs, the salamanders are helping keep carbon locked into the leaves and therefore away from our atmosphere. Unfortunately, salamanders face numerous threats to their well-being, most of them created by humans. Here are your typical causes: logging of old-growth forests, urbanization, and global warming, things that could potentially harm a number of species, including us. However, salamanders also face a unique threat, a fungus called Batrachochitrium salamandrivorans, also known as B-Sal, which causes skin lesions, ataxia, the loss of limb control, and death. This fungal disease was brought to North America and Europe from Asiatic salamanders, who have developed a resistance to it. These Asiatic salamanders first came to North America by means of the global pet trade, as they're often more colorful than their North American counterparts. The disease has already caused a 95% decline of fire salamanders in the Netherlands. So, considering that 50% of the world's salamanders live in North America, the results could be devastating for the world as a whole. And as you can see from this graph, almost half of all species of salamanders are threatened. Although the coastal giant salamander isn't considered threatened as a species, the population in Canada has seen a decline, and many herpetological societies are trying to keep it where it is. And here are all my sources, which doesn't mention the notes we took in class. So thank you for listening. Bye-bye.